Kamal, you love a summit, don't you? You
I
love
do.
a little investment summit every now and then. Hey, that's really
I do.
your thing.
This is the thing that Labour said. This was one of the markers pre the election that Labour hoped would show that they were pro-business. And Rachel Reeves said that within the first 100 days of the new Labour government, they would have an investment summit. This is actually officially, I think, day 102, but we'll give them 2 days.
Broken promises.
Of course, many people have argued a summit like this should really come after the budget. So you've put the cart before the horse, because lots and lots of businesses are very concerned about what is the budget going to do, and then I will make decisions on whether I will invest any money. They can seem slightly ridiculous. All these people fly in, these chief executives, these bankers, they all come in, they all sit in a rather sort of boring conference centre. It's actually the Guildhall, so it's a beautiful building, but they're all sitting there like they're at a conference. Why are they all wasting their time? But it's all about politics, and it's all about the people arriving and showing momentum and confidence. The person that most worries us sometimes in these areas is President Macron of France, who does his one at Versailles every year. And we like to do our one. I actually chaired the last one with Rishi Sunak last year. Yes, I was asked to present.
Little phone call from the Prime Minister. Kamal,
Little phone call.
Are you busy on Tuesday? Love that.
I actually chaired it last year, and it was at Hampton Court Palace and then at Buckingham Palace. And Rishi Sunak did make a very funny joke at the lunch at Hampton Court Palace, because he said, we don't only bring you one royal palace when we invite you to the UK, but we give you a second one as well. And King Charles hosted the event at Buckingham Palace, as he is hosting the event tonight at St Paul's Cathedral.
Did Macron find that funny, by the way?
Well, the joke was that Versailles is obviously the only palace they have. They don't have the second
I know.
one.
I just wondered whether Macron found it funny.
I don't know. I haven't asked him.
No.
All these people do quite like to be glad-handed, and they are taken around and they're given, a possibility of speaking to nearly all of the cabinet are there today. And as I say, it can look like a rather ludicrous event. But for those people that do move around huge amounts of money, and do decide, where is that money going to go? Is it going to go into Europe? Is it going to go into France? Is it going to come to the UK? Is it going to go to America? This is a chance to be shown some of the reasons for possibly investing in the UK. And after Keir Starmer's first 100 days, where lots of it has been pretty negative, and pretty negative around business, and it's only going to get worse, and the whole tone, this is a useful, the government will argue, reset for that relationship.
Although it's not started brilliantly. So we've got Elon Musk, owner of X and Tesla, complaining that he's been snubbed. He was invited this year. He was invited last year. He wasn't invited this year. Could it be because of his protestations during the protests? The UK is no longer a safe country. Could it be that he's quite friendly towards Donald Trump, who we know members of the cabinet, including David Lammy, don't like very much?
He did tweet, or X, or whatever you now call it, after the riots we suffered in this country, that Britain was facing civil war. So I think, you say one thing, are you going to be a little bit OTT? And also, what does Keir Starmer want out of this summit? He wants money, but in terms of the politics of it and the coverage of it, as you said at the top, the headlines are at least a little more positive. He wants Keir Starmer's message about growth. He wants Rachel Reeves' message about growth. If Elon Musk comes to the UK, the only story in town is going to be, what is Elon Musk saying? And Peter Carl, the science minister, today said that, we would have invited him if there was anything that Elon Musk's businesses could invest in the UK, but there isn't, which I didn't think was a very convincing idea.
Well, they've got invested in Germany, and maybe if both
presumably
the Conservatives and Labour nurtured that relationship, they would have invested here.
Battery technology for cars and other vehicles is incredibly important, and obviously Tesla and Elon Musk's associated businesses are huge in EV, electric vehicle technology. And also we have a huge space program, or we want to have a huge space program here, which is going to be a competitor to the European space program. Of course, SpaceX is another of Elon Musk's businesses. So I didn't find Peter Carl's argument very convincing. But I think the more convincing argument is Elon Musk would have just drowned out all other messages by whatever he said. The media would have been going mad for him.
Although Labour themselves have managed to drown out a lot of the messages around the investment summit because of this disagreement over P&O Ferries and the parent company DP Group. Okay, so we discussed this last week and I said to you, is it possible to be both the party of business and the party of the worker? And you made a very good point, which was, well, you have to not see employers as the enemy and employees as unimpeachable. You've got to somehow appeal to both. But never has that dilemma for Labour been better summarised than in the Transport Secretary Louise Haigh making this point both verbally and in a press release from the Department of Transport describing P&O Ferries as rogue employers. Now, lots of people, and you don't have to be on the left, by the way, will sympathise with that view. What happened was P&O Ferries made redundant a load of long-standing workers and replaced them with cheaper agency workers. And quite rightly, the people working for P&O Ferries said, hang on a minute.
Sacked over Zoom.
I think you've breached my employee rights. And that's a perfectly legitimate position. But then here comes the dichotomy for Labour. DP World, the parent group, which is owned by the government of Dubai, who we could probably argue have slightly different attitudes towards workers' rights than we do in the UK, had suggested that they wanted to invest £1 billion in Britain. And therefore you have to keep both sides happy. And the description of P&O Ferries as rogue employers when you're actually trying to take money off the parent company isn't the best look. It overshadows everything. Very awkward for the business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, who was on the broadcast round yesterday. I mean, I spoke to him. I said, this is hard for you, isn't it? Because you are trying to do this investment summit with all bells and whistles. Everyone's talking about your colleagues' comments. I said, unfortunately, this appears to be the politics of Marx, except not Karl, but Groucho. Here are my principles, and if you don't like them, I have others. Because many on the left will be asking themselves, if so many Labour politicians at the time criticised P&O's treatment of its own workers, why on earth take any money at all from the parent company?
We're going to have to start having our bingo klaxon for this, because this is that classic opposition is very different from government. So Keir Starmer was one of the people most critical of P&O Ferries over that sacking of so many of their workers. The laws have been changed so that now seafaring companies have to abide by the laws of the United Kingdom. Louise Haigh was simply repeating the language that they had used in opposition. And of course, as minister, she not only talked about rogue operators, she spoke about boycotting them, because Keir Starmer had demanded that P&O be boycotted in government procurement before he was Prime Minister. But when you are actually the Transport Secretary or the Prime Minister, to talk about boycott has far more weight than if you're an opposition politician.
Yeah,
and they need to go through, because as you said, they had said all these things and then they put it in a press release. You need to go through every word and think to yourself, I'm now in government. So what you say is you should much more broadly say all companies that operate in Britain should share our values for how we employ people fairly, etc., etc. You can make the same point without making it into a dividing line and a culture war. And of course, as you say, they did then risk the actual investment. Now, it was a 48-hour row, and I think so. DP World has said, as you said, is now going to do it, but there was no need to have that argument, and that was the story of the weekend, which derailed all these better headlines that they want.
To be fair, Reynolds mounted a good defence because he said, this is why we brought in our new workers' rights. We don't want to have any more fire and rehire type episodes. But the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, hit the nail on the head when it comes to this contradiction at the heart of Labour. Because he is saying, you're talking about growth, and it's almost surprised me that you're using that word, because we do associate Labour and indeed the left with more regulation than the right. So how can it be possible to, on one hand, be promoting growth, but on the other hand, tie people up in bureaucracy? He joked with him saying, you should have a minister for anti-red tape. And I think that's what business people, particularly in the business community, are going to be thinking when they're looking at Labour. As you say as well, Kamal, on one hand, Labour talking a great game about nurturing British industry, growing British industry, but at the same time, on October the 30th, potentially stifling it. We haven't had so far This suggestion by Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's Questions last week that Labour will put up employer national insurance contributions, we haven't had that claim denied. I put it to Reynolds. He wouldn't rule it out. That would be a fundamental breach of the Labour Party manifesto, and as we heard from the Federation for Small Businesses last week, completely anti small and medium-sized endeavours.
And a tax on employers is still a tax on people. In the end, we pay all taxes. Individuals pay all taxes. So it's not a defence, which I think the government will use if they do put up national insurance contributions on employer contributions. We're not raising taxes on working people because this is on business. But businesses, in the end, we all pay the taxes that businesses pay themselves. Let's hear a little bit of what Keir Starmer's actually saying and laying out this proposal for why Britain is open for business.
Growth. You have to grow your business, and I have to grow my country. I'll leave it to you to decide if you think voters or shareholders are the more forgiving audience. But without growth, let's just agree, it's a difficult conversation, whoever you're talking to. And that therefore growth is the cause that binds us together, the shared endeavour of prosperity. It's why we've made it the number one test of this government. And I'm determined to do everything in my power to galvanise growth, determined for this country to be the highest growing economy in the G7. That is our most important national mission.
But he did address that concern that some businesses have about Labour's new plans for workers.
Let me be clear. They're pro-growth. Workers with more security at work, with higher wages, that is a better growth model for this country. It will lead to a more dynamism in our labour market. And seriously, we need to think differently about this. A nation's position in the world is changing all the time.
Sorry, I'm just pouring my tea there. I was really enjoying listening to that so much, I thought I'd just pour myself a cup there.
So not overly dynamic, actually, from the Prime Minister talking about dynamism there. Big issue for the government is, as we said at the top of the podcast, you can say all you want about we need more growth, we need things to happen quicker. But actually, if we look at the evidence, it is clear that the UK, under what any colour of government, finds it incredibly difficult to build things. Just last week, I was reading about what's called the Lower Thames Crossing. This is a tunnel that they want to build between Essex and Kent to help the big bottleneck at the Dartford crossing. Now, we have spent £800 million on the planning application for that tunnel. £800 million
How is that even possible?
On the planning application for that tunnel. A remarkable number that includes all the planning applications, the technical surveys, buying up some land, but nothing has actually been built as a tunnel yet. We first said we were going to build it in 2009. There's been not a spade in the ground, and it is now 2024. We have spent more on planning for that tunnel, which is again by Louise Haigh been put off until a final decision being put off until now next May, than Norway has paid building and completing the longest road tunnel in the world. And the problem we have is we find it very difficult to get through planning, to get through the Whitehall departments that are involved, that have an interest in so many different parts of how we construct things in the United Kingdom. Until we work out what is our problem here, why was HS2 so over budget? Why has Rolls-Royce announced that it is making a loss on plans to build smaller module nuclear power stations because the government is not going quickly enough? Why have we still not built a third runway at Heathrow, even though the permission for that was agreed years ago? You can get in as much money as you like, but if you can't build things to time, you're never going to get the repayments back, and all you end up doing is adding to your debt.
that 800 million just on planning alone, I mean, I appreciate that would have involved consultation, inspectors, no doubt quite a few legal fees. But that is mind-boggling, Kamal. And equally, decisions like not expanding Heathrow. I do have sympathy with the people that live nearby, but this is London. We are what, the 6th biggest economy in the world. Why wouldn't we have extra runways at both Heathrow and Gatwick? Because we are a major capital city, but also a destination for the rest of the world to come to us. I mean, these investment decisions are based on things like, is the infrastructure there? Is it easy to move people in and out? Where could we build our premises? Are they cost efficient? How quickly can they be built if we do get planning permission? Are we going to be ending up in some sclerotic process that takes years and years with endless challenges and NIMBYism and all the rest of it? I mean, it's interesting because funny enough, when I interviewed Boris Johnson, whenever it was last week, he was saying how disappointed he was with HS2, the final leg being scrapped, and this lunacy about ending it at Old Oak Common and not into Euston, which
is a suburb of West London, near Wormwood Scrubs, the prison.
Yeah, but not least because anybody that drives through that part of London can see how much has been destroyed to make way for this project, for it then not to end up in the capital. Literally, what is the point? I live on the border with Buckinghamshire, and I know how much disruption the tunnels have been causing the Chilterns and its residents. So the idea that this thing that was originally sold to us, not just high speed, but high capacity between London and Birmingham, now not even coming to London, strikes everybody as insane. Johnson was a builder. He was somebody, not literally, obviously, although didn't he say he liked painting? He built buses and painted them. But he was somebody who kept on going around.
Toy buses and painted them, not real
That's
ones.
True.
Yes,
that
yes,
is true.
Yes.
He was somebody who was going around Downing Street. Many people said this, often disparagingly, by the way. We must build bridges, build. He wanted a bridge between Scotland and Northern Ireland, didn't he? He wanted an airport
in the Thames estuary that was
Yes.
impossible. Look. He had his boosterism, but he wasn't actually practical. Was the problem with Boris Johnson?
He built a lot when he was mayor of London for 2 terms. He did put infrastructure in. I mean, some of it was criticised. The Garden Bridge that never was, okay? But, I mean, that could be about ego. It could be, I want big projects to represent to be a part of my legacy. But this idea of driving forward, I mean, it is a bit more positive, isn't it? To be just saying yes instead of no to some of these projects. You mentioned the nuclear stuff. I was speaking last night, Kamal, because I happened to host the Curry Life Awards, and Charlotte Nichols was there, who is the MP for Warrington North, and her constituency includes Sellafield. She was saying how much demand there was from her constituents for the government to do more on nuclear, to produce more nuclear fuel. So, I mean, I was at school being sold the benefits of nuclear power in science lessons, and we don't seem to be that much further on.
It's one of the biggest reasons that France is much more likely to hit its net zero targets, because it has invested very heavily at vast expense in nuclear power. Hinkley Point C, which is the huge new nuclear power station in Somerset, they said originally planned to cost £18 billion, is now going to cost £50 billion, and it'll only be finished 5 years later than planned and 12 years after construction began. They're now talking about HS2 coming into Euston, the main terminal in London, in not being completed until 2040. I mean, if it's completed before I die, I think a lot of people will be quite surprised.
Well, I hope it is.
It doesn't matter which government we are talking about. Between 2010 and 2024, we had a Conservative-led government. Now we've got a Labour government. I think there is genuine desire, both in Conservative cabinets and Labour cabinets, for more action. But as soon as they get into the actual problems of the process of how we do things, it is obviously very difficult. There must be a learning point from the London Olympics. At the beginning of the programme to make the London Olympics in 2012, lots of people said, we are never going to do that. They pointed back to the building of the extension to the Jubilee line, for example, in London, which was years late. Crossrail at that stage, also in London, was years behind schedule. But we hit every single deadline for London 2012, and it opened on time. And I think from memory to budget, and I think from memory almost all manufactured in the UK. There must be something about that project and how it worked. And also about the vaccine task force. I write about this this morning in my comment piece for The Telegraph. The way that the vaccine task force to make the vaccine for COVID was taken out of the usual Whitehall processes. Is there a way of doing that for our most important infrastructure projects without getting into the problem of no checks and balances means that there's then allegations of corruption? The system is there for a reason, that people's words, as you were saying, in the Chilterns for HS2, people's thoughts have to be taken into account, different competing interests. You know, we're not a dictatorship. We are a democracy. You can't just drive through high-speed rail, for example, as they might be able to do in China. But there's clearly something happening in places like France, in places like Spain, where they have built, and Germany, where they have built high-speed rail networks, for example, that we're not doing here, which is making the big difference.
Also, imagine being in the north and all of those northern rail projects are now on hold, and you're saying to yourself, it's really still difficult to get from Leeds to Manchester by rail, which is ludicrous in 2024. Also, okay, we do have the odd project that ends up being a vanity project or a white elephant. I mean, this happened to the Millennium Dome before it was given that new lease of life. I was thinking this only the other day when I was travelling on the Elizabeth line. Once these things are built and in place, and you sit on them and you think, oh, this is extremely convenient that I can get from Paddington to Liverpool Street so quickly now without having to change tubes and all the rest of it. Generally, the public really warms to these projects. I'm sure that if there was another runway at Heathrow and we were all able to travel more out of there and there were more options for people coming in, that actually people would reflect on it and go, well, this has been a great thing.
So Keir Starmer is going to have to be brave here. He's going to ruffle quite a few feathers, Camilla. I wonder how much local MPs, Labour or Conservative or Lib Dem or Reform, are going to really allow these things to happen on their doorsteps. That's always the problem we get into in the end. It is easier to delay, as Louise Haigh has done with this Thames crossing yet again to next spring. It is always easier to delay than to make a decision.
Be bold, be brave, be less socialist would be my advice.